Welcome to People, Places, and Things, a travel podcast that brings you captivating stories, fascinating people, and unforgettable destinations from all around the world. I'm your host, Ryan Lowe. Let's dive into this journey together. On today's episode, we are talking to Michael Kaplan again on part 2 of his book, The Happy Wanderer, A Dyslexic's Global Adventure. Welcome back, Michael.
Great to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're going to dive right into it. Last time we were talking about East Germany and your adventures over there. At that point in time, in the 80s, before the communist regime fell, we're going right into chapter 16 to the Yak Wool King. So you traveled to Nepal previously and did a couple treks, but this time you wanted to start a clothing company. Go into that.
Right. So I had been traveling and then trying to steady myself in the U.S. and found myself wanting to travel again. I tried a bunch of corporate jobs in the U.S. and nothing was working out, and actually they made me miserable. And I started thinking back to my time in Nepal. Now, Nepal is one of the hardest countries to get to, but it's also one of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful. And so I started thinking about it, and the local people wear yak wool jackets. Yak is like a hairy cow. It's sacred in Nepal. And I started thinking about the design and the jackets. It was a time in the U.S. where natural fibers were very popular. And I got the idea of importing yak wool jackets into the U.S. In fact, I thought, well, I'll be the yak wool king and make millions. Wasn't a well thought out program, but I did my research in the U.S. about jackets and so forth, and sold my car, sold everything I owned, and bought a round-trip ticket to Nepal, and off to Nepal I went. And on the last flight from New Delhi, India, into Kathmandu, Nepal, there were about an equal number of animals as people on the flight. It's developing world kind of stuff. And I even felt something between my legs, and somebody three seats behind me was crawling under the seats and trying to steal my camera and my money. So I stomped on his hand, and that put an end to that. So when we arrived in Nepal, on a very tinny speaker, I heard, "Mr. Kaplan, Mr. Kaplan," and I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble already. And what had happened was, because I had done the research, the Nepalese government thought I was a big multinational coming to invest in Nepal. And I was just a flunky trying to start selling yak wool jackets. But they escorted me past all the security, and for the next week, I would be picked up at my little hotel, a hostel, with a black car with flags on the fender, and they would take me around Nepal. It was actually the king's uncle that was taking me around, and that's how they justify their day. They take VIPs around and have a big lunch, and I realized that I hadn't even seen a factory in over a week, so I excused myself politely and went and found the best yak wool factory. And the best yak wool factory doesn't have electricity. This is definitely the developing world. So they have women sitting on the floor with their kids running around, and they would hold a hair up to the light and say, this is a good hair, this is a bad hair. And that's how they started the production process. So it was very rudimentary, but it was interesting to learn how they do things. They've been doing it this way for hundreds of years. It's part of their cultural traditions. And so I asked them, when's the next delivery of hair coming down? And the guy who was running the factory looked up into the sky, and he says, probably in 5 days. And I say, why probably in 5 days? So the farmers up in the mountains shave their yaks, and they bring the hair down to sell. He said, well, because they can only come down at night. It's a 2-day trek. And if it's cloudy or raining or something, they don't come down. So I said, our monthly supply of product depends on the weather? And he said, that is correct, in a very nice lilt that they have there. So already I was starting to realize that I'm way out of my league and out of my element. And so we started learning about how to make the jackets and how to clean the hair and so forth. And one of the things that I learned is I brought over chemicals to kill the bacteria in the hair. I had learned that you can't bring bacteria in hair into the U.S. And of course, this is developing world, and they said, "What is bacteria?" And I'm sorry if I offend anybody with my poor takeoff on Nepalese accent. And I said, well, it's like little animals in the hair. You can't see them. And he was like, no, sir, no little animals in our hair. And I realized this is now 2 or 3 months of trying to get this off the ground and trying to get supply chains and being able to export it to the U.S. and get it into the U.S. that eventually I learned that it just wasn't going to happen. They would not wash the hair in chemicals to kill the bacteria because that's not how they've always done it. And I eventually came to the conclusion this is not going to work. And now I know why nobody was bringing bringing Nepalese hair into the U.S. for jackets. So I reflected back, and I had to take a flight back to the U.S. with no money now, no future now, and I was thinking, what do I want to remember from this adventure? And one of my takeaways was it's very hard to do things differently in these developing world cultures from the way they've been doing them for hundreds of years, and they just were not ready to bring the product up to the needs of our marketplace. And then my other thought was, failing is not the end of the world. And okay, I kind of failed in this endeavor, but I got a chance to see Nepal. I did some trekking and rafting and hiking. And I also got a chance to learn about business. And indeed, to this day, I share this story with my students when I'm teaching at universities to let them know that, again, failure is not the end of the world. And life goes on, and hopefully you learn from it and take it with you to your next adventure.
Yeah, it's really not a failure if you get something from it and you take something away from it. You had a great adventure in Nepal and were able to trek and do these adventures and come back with more experience. Yeah, you didn't make the business that you wanted to, but at the same time, you went out and tried, and that's the main takeaway, I think, is you went out and went after it.
Yeah, I'm kind of proud of myself. It took a little bit of courage, and I learned a lot. I lost money, but I gained a whole lot of confidence and experience, and I've taken that with me for the rest of my days.
Yeah, so coming back stateside after leaving Nepal, you were kind of in the same position you were in beforehand before you left, and kind of, wondering what you're going to do with your life and looking for the next job and next career. This time, you got aboard a cruise ship. And again, it's a common theme in your life, and you're at sea again on a Norwegian cruise ship, working aboard and experiencing new countries. Speak on that experience.
Yeah, so again, I tried to settle in the U.S., not happy, and this was a recurring theme. I was getting frustrated. I was getting older. I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do with myself. And this is a commonality for a lot of people in their late 20s and trying to figure out what their passions are, what they want to do. And I applied to a cruise ship company. I didn't know much about them, but it's called Royal Viking Lines. They're a Swedish Norwegian cruise ship company. And I applied and heard nothing. And then all of a sudden they say, okay, you're hired. You have to be on board in 2 weeks. And I didn't know much about them, but I was hired as a purser. And this is far different. In my past, I've been a fisherman and a seaman on an oil tanker. But now I was going to be a purser on a cruise ship and completely out of my familiar zone. So I went down and picked up the ship in New York, and it was very odd. They give you uniforms, they have a whole regimen, and a purser, for our purposes, looks a lot like the reception of a hotel. You answer questions, you change money. In those days, you bought different stamps for each country you wanted to mail a postcard from. And so I got in there, learned the ropes. Was a big steep learning curve. There's a lot of discipline on a cruise ship. A couple of my takeaways was you work very hard. We worked about 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 6 or 7 months in a row, never a day off. And that, believe me, wears on you. I saw, they call it a contract when you're working on a ship. I saw people at the end of their contract that looked years older than when they came on board. It's a very hard lifestyle. On the flip side, you get to see different ports, only for a few hours, but at least you get to see them. And the parties amongst the crew is amazing. The crew life is fascinating. They have a ton of romances, a ton of conflicts. They get very close with each other. There's a crew bar down below decks. There's a laundry, their own dining facilities, their own everything, actually. And many passengers on cruise ships don't realize it's a whole nother world down below the sea line and the water line, rather. And my cabin was right on the water line. I had a little porthole so that when we're underway, if I looked out my porthole, it looked like a washing machine, just water flowing by. And if we were at rocky seas, at certain points I'd be looking up at the blue sky, and then the ship would shift, and then I'd be looking down into the ocean, and that was kind of disconcerting. But I got involved with every committee I could, got to know a lot of people, had a lot of adventures with the crew, and it was a long, hard. I ended up spending almost a year and a half on the ships. It was a hard time, but a very fun time. And one of my fun things when I started was I had now learned Swedish, but I didn't tell the Norwegian and Swedish women on board that I understood them. So I knew exactly who to avoid and who to spend more time with because they didn't realize I understood when they were talking about me. And it was the best scam I've ever had, except we were on an island in the Caribbean and I was in a bar and I heard the two Swedish girls behind me say nice comments about my backside. And it takes me a second to translate. And I laughed so much the beer came out of my nose. And they said, "Do you understand us?" And I go, "Yeah." And so I blew my own scam. Still angry about it 40 years later, but it was nice to be able to, I don't know, be with so many different countries. We have 93 different countries on board as a crew, and to me, somebody who loves learning about cultures, it was fascinating. And as it happens, just recently I've been teaching on cruise ships. So 35, 40 years after I left the cruise industry, I'm back on cruise ships now in a different capacity and talking about places we're going. But it's a special world, and if you haven't done a cruise, I kind of recommend it and just to experience the different types of cruise ships.
Yeah, a lot of people do not know about working on board. Some people think it's very glamorous and it you have these contracts and a lot of people don't know that you don't get days off. Yes, you go to ports and and you get to explore for a few hours, but you're right back on the ship working. There's not much downtime, and that's a good way to save money and kind of stay out of the fold and out of trouble. But at the same time, it's a grind. If you're working for 8 months at a time, that wears on your mental health, I imagine,
Ab-
physical as well.
Absolutely. And I was the only American in the crew. The entertainers are American also, but they're not exactly part of the crew. And it was interesting. Like I say, we worked very hard. I enjoyed it, but it was also a lot of discipline. You can't do this, you can't do that. And that part was hard for me. Um, I look back on it fondly, but I also came to the realization that my future was going to be limited for me. That the way cruise ships are organized, they're set into three departments. One is the deck and bridge, which is the officers and the crew member who run the ship. The next is the hotel, this is basically a floating hotel, so it's by far the biggest department. And the third is the engine department, and of course they're with the air conditioning, the plumbing, and propulsion system. And I was in the hotel department, realizing that the most I could aspire to would be hotel director someday, and that didn't really float my boat. But I don't look at it as a disappointment. I look at it as an adventure, but not for me.
Yeah, so you did a couple of contracts on board with the Norwegian Cruise Line, and coming back to the States and getting settled back in, um, you had that learning experience and you knew that kind of cruise ships weren't for you in that capacity, working for them and ending up in a dead end job eventually. So you wanted something more. You were more ambitious, and it led you to going back into academia, which you hated and fought so hard to get out of and not go back in. But you found the Harvard Extension School. Talk about that and then talk about applying and getting into the Harvard Extension School.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I came back to the States. I'm now in my late 20s. And I remember like looking at the mirror going, what the F am I going to do with my life? And the veins of my neck were popping out. I had ambition, but between the dyslexia and my dislike for the, I don't know, corporate world, for lack of a better word, I was lost. And it was a very hard time. And I got a job as a commercial real estate appraiser, and I went to a couple courses for it and became an appraiser. And I was miserable. I hated that life. I had a little cubicle. I took the subway into work every day. You're allowed a half hour off for lunch. If you take any longer, one of the political games that your colleagues will say, has anybody seen Kaplan, as a way to get you in trouble? And I just really regaled against that type of environment. And I eventually got fired. I'm being honest with everything. Nobody likes to be fired, but it was the best thing that could have happened to me. I had found my health and my happiness were going down the toilet and fast. And I bounced around to a bunch of other jobs, and nothing seemed to be working. Truly was hitting a low point in my life. I would say, if not clinically depressed, very close to it. And I remember I was in the subway station in Boston. Boston's the oldest subway in the U.S. And I was thinking, if I just take a step out in front of the train, that will end everything. And I don't want to be melodramatic here or cliche, but it really was that kind of a low where, nothing works and all my friends and family are moving on with their lives and I just seemed to be lost. And I didn't have a light at the end of the tunnel. It really was clearly a low point in my life. And I read about it in The Happy Wanderer. And I think, we all have low points, but for me, that was clearly mine. I was 29 and absolutely lost. So I was thinking about, jumping in front of a train or how I would end things and who would care and all these different terrible thoughts. And across the tracks in the train station was an advertisement for Harvard's Extension School. And I looked at it, didn't think much about it, and then I started reading it carefully, and I, for some reason, applied. And I clearly remembered all my frustrations in academia, but I didn't feel like I had many other options going on or things to look forward to, and I didn't think they'd accept me anyhow. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, I got a letter of acceptance. And I was just shocked. This is Harvard. Now, it's the Harvard Night School. They call it the Extension School, out of 14 schools at Harvard. But I was so shocked that I was sure that another Michael Kaplan is who they intended to admit. So I took what little money I had, which was from my bar mitzvah savings, and I ran down and registered and paid with the theory that if I've already paid, they can't kick me out. And so that's how I got into Harvard education. And I couldn't tell anybody because I'd failed so many times. My family and friends would have said, oh, you're just dreaming again. That's not going to work. You're wasting your money. And I didn't need that kind of a downer. So I got a job, just a more or less menial job. But my focus in my life was going to Harvard. And I'd work all day and then take the subway over to Harvard at night. And Harvard has, in this extension school, they have a good system for those of us that are academically challenged, which is they're not going to look at your transcripts from undergrad, but instead they'll let you take 3 courses, and if you have an A minus average, you can stay in the program. And that was tailor-made for me because my undergrad, I had the lowest GPA in the history of my major, and I had failed out of law school and failed out of other grad schools. So this was a new, clean slate. And so I dedicated myself to working really hard. I remember studying on the subway, in the bathroom. at work, wherever I could. I was studying, 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 and I had the feeling like if this doesn't work, I'm going to end up being a bellboy somewhere and just being a pretty unhappy camper. So I really disciplined myself and had determination, studied really, really, really hard. Um, and never in a million years did I ever think I would be at Harvard. And if I had told my friends and family, they would have just laughed at me. So, like anything else, when you start, you're overwhelmed and you have your doubts, and then you start learning little tricks. And I was finding that if I study things that really fascinated me, in my case was international events, um, I actually had a background in it because I'd been to most of these countries, and it was just truly interesting. It was no longer the dry material that you had in law school or often in undergrad. This is stuff I really loved. And I started working my way through it. And you have to take 10 classes and have an A minus average. I, in undergrad, had never had an A minus in anything, including artwork or gym class. I had just never seen an A minus. So this was daunting, but I worked really hard, got my A minus average after 3 classes, was able to tell my family and friends that I had been admitted into Harvard. And it took me longer, but I spent the next 3 years getting my master's degree in international political economy. And so when I look back on that period of my life, I went from depressed and thinking of ending it all to having a Harvard graduate degree, and that opened up a whole lot of possibilities for me. And it was really an important epiphany in my life when my prospects changed 180 degrees.
That's awesome that you were able to just turn it around. And I think that resonates with a lot of people these days that have social media and they see these perfect lives and all these people, and they see the results, but they don't see the hard work and overcoming challenges like dyslexia and these things like um, prior academia results that you had that you overcame and conquered eventually and got your master's degree in something that you love, and you were able to study harder because you love that, and you were able to hyper focus and hyper fixate on that, and that's very awesome, and I think a lot of people need to hear that.
Yeah, I have a moment in time that I remember because it's not a made for TV movie. We do have a lot of failures. We do have a lot of troubles to overcome. I did take longer to get my studies completed, but Harvard Library is like a bunch of tunnels underneath the campus. It's the second largest library in the world after the Library of Congress. And I would do my thesis research in there, and I had a friendly rival who would walk by me on his way out every day with a stack full of photocopies. And I was so intimidated because I was trying to read it all and understand it and internalize it. And he seemed to be so far ahead of me. And in the end, he never wrote his thesis. As far as I know, he's still in there researching. So my point is, at a certain point, you have to understand what you're working on. Think it, I call it standing in the shower syndrome. Think it when you're in the shower, this is time for you to concentrate. How are you going to organize it? How are you going to collect your thoughts? How are you going to move forward? And then I was able to start writing the thesis, and it took about a year. And the cute one was I went back to Harvard for my graduation ceremony, and a little bureaucratic young man said to me, "I'm sorry, you're going to get a blank diploma today." And I was like, okay. And here I was with a cap and gown on, special Harvard clothing, and my family was there. And what had happened was my 246 footnote was incorrect. It had a semicolon instead of a colon, and so I had to republish the entire thesis before they would give me the diploma. And I tell that story to my students now when I tell them what a stickler I am for writing properly, and they begin to understand that it could be a lot worse.
So after Harvard, you leave there and continue your study. So you move out west and you want to go to business school. You want to work for yourself. So you go to the Thunderbird School of Business in Arizona afterwards. So talk about your transition into business school.
Yeah, so as I graduated Harvard, I started my own little business, and I failed miserably. I didn't have any of the financial skills, the marketing skills, sales skills to be successful. And that, again, at the time I didn't realize it, but failing at that business and going bankrupt was the best thing that could have happened to me. So I decided I needed more business skills. And there, I applied to Thunderbird, which is known for international business. And I got in, and the way I got into it was it's in Arizona, and everybody wants to start in September, and nobody wants to be there in July and August. So I applied for the summer session, and basically they were so happy to get any students. I got in, and then I deferred to the fall session and started with the rest of my class. And again, it took me longer. Again, I'd never had math classes or statistics or accounting or finance. And I struggled. And at one point, the dean told me, I don't think this is going to work for you. I think you better withdraw from the program. And in an earlier time in my life, I would have withdrawn and quit. But at this stage, I was now 31 or 32, and I'm going, I'm not quitting. You can throw me out, but I'm not quitting. So I got tutors. I worked my way through everything. I had to learn another language. I had to learn a lot of these math and quant courses. And again, it took me longer, but again, I was able to get the degree. And while I was there, I happened to go start the ski club, and we came to a place called Park City, Utah, and that starts my chapter 19.
Yeah, so you were already familiar with the Rocky Mountain West. You graduated business school and you wanted to move out west and you wanted to move into a ski town. You found Park City after doing a ski trip here and thought it would be the perfect city for a business. Talk about setting up your business, moving here, and why you love it so much here in Park City.
Yeah, so we came. I brought about 30 students up here, and as I was starting to graduate, it it came to the conclusion that I don't belong in the corporate world. I'm not going to get at 30, now I'm 38 or so. I'm not going to get an entry level job in Ford or Exxon or whatever. And so I thought, well, I got to maybe be an entrepreneur because I just like working as my own boss. And I put the two together, and I thought, well, you know, I had been here on holiday. It was a great town. It has a lot of opportunities here. The prices were relatively low. There was room to start a business. We had a feeder city of Salt Lake City not far away. The skiing was amazing. So I started thinking, what kind of business could I do in Park City, Utah? And about the only thing I had skills at was drinking beer. So I thought, okay, I'll open a beer pub. And I came up here and looked at a couple spaces, and it was a very hard process. I found what I thought was the ideal space. It was an underground on Main Street that I could afford, and I made it a big application to the landlord, and I was happened to be with my commercial realtor when the landlord called back, and they were laughing on the phone and talking, and I couldn't understand what was happening, and they hung up, and my friend now, the realtor, said, well, they're not going to do it. And I go, what do you mean they're not going to do it? Well, they don't want to do it. We'll have to find another space. And I go, well, why? What's the problem? And my realtor was like, I don't know. They just don't want to have a bar in their building, I guess. So I went out and did the research. And indeed, the problem was they were trying to rent out the other spaces and they didn't want a bar in the basement. And I understand that. You know, bar is a lot of wear and tear and noise and so forth on a building. But I did a little more research and I sent them a letter. I said, I expect about 40,000 people over the course of the year to come down to the building. They'll see the other properties there, and I think it could be a real amenity to the building. So I reversed their challenge. And as quickly as they said no, they said yes. They even lowered the rent. And next thing you know is I'm signing papers to open a bar, having never owned a bar. So I had no money. So to put down the down payment and get the equipment in there, I actually took what was the remainder of my student loan, if I'm being honest, and that's illegal to do. But I was desperate, and so I took the 26,000 remaining on my student loan and started the bar. Uh, It was a lot of work setting it up. I tried to make it look like Cheers on TV or something. There's a word in other languages, like in German, it's gesellig, in Dutch it's gemütlich. Sorry, those are reversed. And making it cozy and warm and comfortable. And these are concepts that I wanted to do. And I decided to make it a jazz and blues nightclub. And I had a lot of wood and stone in there. It looked like it had been there for 100 years. And truthfully, one of the biggest tricks I did in a ski town was I got a few very lovely, nice young ladies to be bartenders. And that did the trick. And sure enough, when we opened, we were a hit. And I was so prepared to be a failure. And it was very rewarding to all that work to be successful. And so I ended up working the first year 241 days in a row. I took 2 days off, worked another 241 days in a row, and long, long days. But one of my takeaways was when I opened a bar, all of my friends and family were, Michael, what are you doing? You're going to lose all your money. You don't know what you're doing. Get a real job. And it was hard when you don't have any emotional support and you're going to be an entrepreneur to keep your poise. But I believed in what I was doing. I wanted to give it a shot. And like I say, we started making money. And within a year, the same people that had criticized me so deeply were like, you have the life. You don't have a boss. You get to come and go as you please. You're living in a ski town. And it struck me how they had completely changed their opinion of my life. And I said to them, you can do the same if you want to try something new, leave your job and start all over again. It takes a little courage, but it's also very rewarding. But not a person amongst them would take my life. It was not in their nature. And that's one thing I've learned is to be true to your nature. And I don't mind taking risks. It comes from all those years of travel. And in this case, I did something that people criticized me about, I was successful in, and it gave me a great deal of confidence. I learned a lot about myself, a lot about business, a lot about people in town, and I really, ended up living here now 24 years based on that experience.
Yeah, with all your travels, you were used to taking risk and you started this business because you knew you had to work for yourself. And the restaurant and bar industry is very tight margins. It's hard to be profitable, but you found a way to do it through making the bar have a great ambiance, your staff being personable and lovely, as you mentioned. So, with all that said, leading up to the Olympics, how much work did you put in and how much time did it take to set all that up to make that bar successful?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I learned that when you work for yourself, and when you're your own entrepreneur, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like a hobby because you love it. You have a passion for it. And I was in there every night meeting people, introducing them to other people, teaching my bartenders how to remember drinks and how to be personable. I found being an entrepreneur extremely rewarding. And to the point where I have a saying now that once you work for yourself, you'll never work for others. It was very hard work, but very rewarding, and again, a life-changing experience for me.
So the bar lasted around 7 years, successful. You sold it. You got into real estate. But at the same time, you were a professor. You were teaching, you've taught in a few universities here in Utah and abroad. So you've taught all over the world. One program that you were into was the Semester at Sea program. You went to sea and explored many, many countries, dozens of countries, and two contracts. So you did one off the East Coast and one off the West Coast of the United States. Talk about that experience and the Semester at Sea program and how special it was.
Yeah, when I came to Utah, I had to eat, so I got a job teaching at several different universities here, and realized that I like teaching. I got good feedback from the students, and frankly, it wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough for me to survive until I got my business off the ground. And then I kept teaching throughout having the business and kind of moving up to better schools and universities. And again, that was rewarding for me too. So I vividly remember doing this. I was late at night in the bar, and not many people around, and I got on the internet, and I happened to research the Semester at Sea program, which is a university cruise ship where they go around the world and they learn. And I applied for it, and lo and behold, they accepted me. So, based on my past as such a poor student, it was really amazing to be invited to be teaching in all these different schools, and semester at sea no exception. So I did it twice. One was leaving from our west coast and going west around the world, and the other one was leaving from our coast and going east around the world. They're 104 days long. When we're at sea, the professors teach, and there's about 35 of us, and there's about 700 students. And then when you come to port, you're in port for 3, 4, 5 days, and both the teachers and professors have a chance to go and explore that country. And I just took advantage of it. I went on safaris in Africa and toured favelas in Brazil. A favela is a poorer area of the cities, um, and just had one adventure after the next with my students. The hard part was that you have 719-year-olds who know everything. And it was hard to live with the people you're teaching. One of my first takeaways was all you hear is, oh my God! And I couldn't believe it. And this type of enthusiasm and animation and stuff was so different than my world at that point. And it was both rewarding to see them so enthusiastic and so excited, but also a little daunting. I gave lectures about safety in traveling, but a lot of 19-year-olds kind of feel like they know everything. And it was not well attended. I had seen how poorly they do travel. In the first stop, for instance, in Brazil, almost all of them had lost their money or their cameras or their cell phones to theft. And I could see that they were kind of not good travelers. They were, in Swedish, you say blue eyed. They were very naive, not well prepared. They would leave the ship with all American clothing on and giggling and talking very loud in American accents, and they were an easy mark for the pickpockets and other thieves out there. So I try to teach them about safety in traveling, and the best advice I had for them was if something seems out of place, it probably is. You just without being paranoid, be aware of your surroundings. And if there's running footsteps in your direction late at night, turn around and take a look and see what's going on. And just be aware without, again, being paranoid. And some of them understood that and took it to heart. Some of them didn't. There was a lot of unfortunate things that happened to the students in their travels. But, if it's not something that damages your health and safety, it might be a good learning lesson in that alone. So a little theft didn't kill them, but they learned. Um, but just to be aware and know what's happening around you. One of the nice things about the whole program was watching the students become good travelers. And they became so much more sophisticated, so much more worldly. And by the end of the voyage, they were really very competent travelers, and they were used to negotiating prices. I even watched one of my young lady students, we were in Hawaii, go into CVS and try to talk down the price of toothpaste. So she had overdone it a little bit, but they had grown more than perhaps any other time I've ever seen people in a short 3 or 4 month period. And that, when you get to know your students, you have an emotional attachment to them, that was very rewarding for me.
Yeah, being 19 years old, I can only imagine traveling that extensively and just being let free at some of these ports, more or less in some capacity with your professor. But still, you're alone at sometimes. And I can only imagine some of these countries like Brazil seeing that ship coming a mile away, like, oh, the semester at sea program's here. We know what to do. I
Yeah.
can only imagine. But I want to get back into it and talk about some of the more memorable experiences you had with your students in some of these more obscure countries.
Sure, a couple stick out in my mind. One was in Namibia. Namibia is to the northwest of South Africa. It's pretty much just a plain desert. There's nothing much there. But in the north, they have a tribe called the Ovihimba, and we organized a quick flight up there. Um, and I talked to one of my young male students, and he was from the Midwest and not well experienced, and he was smiling ear to ear. I said, "Why are you so excited?" He goes, "We're going to see real boobies today." And I was like, "Okay." And so we went and we toured the Ovihimba tribe. These are a very famous tribe, hard to get to, but one of the interesting things is they don't bathe. They rub a red paste made from mud and vegetables on their skin, and that's what protects them from the sun and also from odor. And it's tribal living. The women do a lot of the work, and the men kind of just watch the cows out in the pastures and so forth. And a fascinating culture, um, and really interesting to learn about their lives and their values. But on the plane back to the ship, my young 18-year-old Midwesterner young man said he had a very down look on his face. And I was like, "What's the matter? Was it an interesting?" "Yeah, yeah," but he had seen all these women who had several children by the time they're 23 or 25. And let's just say they were topless, but things aren't where they once were. And he says, "I have a newfound respect for the brassiere." And I thought that was a cute line, and another great learning experience for my students. And the other one I want to share really quickly is I brought my class to in Vietnam to the Nike factory, and I really didn't know what to expect. But imagine just huge halls, each with 10,000 people in them, each mostly women, humped over sewing machines, sewing Nike shoes. And that process and the din, the noise, and the craziness that was going on in there. We weren't allowed to take pictures, but I took pictures anyhow. And it was just a really life changing experience for my students who probably were wearing Nikes. And one of the things that we talked about is they only get paid, meaning the workers only get paid $3.50 a day, but that's about $2 more than the average Vietnamese was making at the time. And so it was almost slave labor by our standards. But as we left the compound where the factory was, sure enough, and there's a building that has the employment office, and there was a long line of local people wanting a job at 350 a day in pay.
Those are experiences that change your life forever, especially for the students that never seen something like that. It definitely gives you a different perspective on how some of these developing countries have it and how these people are living their day-to-day life. And like you said, they felt sorry for them, but at the same time there's a long line and they're getting paid more than the average wage. So at the same time it is bettering their lives there because the cost of living is reflects that and what they're getting paid, and they're able to do a little bit more with their time.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions afterwards, and one of the things that we talked about is our values and our standards may or may not be universal. And it was important for them to see how tough people have it and how hard they work without complaint, and to see people wanting those jobs. And maybe they would look at their own materialistic tendencies in a different light. So I find that one particularly poignant. I made a special section of the Happy Wanderer about it, because it was such a keen learning experience for my students.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that makes for better humans. So they come back stateside and they're able to get back in the workforce and have a different perspective and appreciate things more and appreciate the amenities and privileges that they do have.
Absolutely, that's a very keen way to put it. Um, it was really a life altering experience for them, and I'm glad they had the chance.
Absolutely. Sounds like an amazing program. Moving on, so you've taught all around the world. Scandinavia, the Netherlands. So Amsterdam was really special for you. Talk about teaching and talk about being a professor in Amsterdam and what it means to you.
I got invited to teach in Amsterdam um, for a one semester type of course, and I didn't think much about it. I thought it was another adventure, but it ended up being 12 springs that I taught there, and I still consider it my home away from home. I really love the town, the Dutch mentality. So I taught international marketing over there, and one of my experiences was that the students are really varied in their abilities. I had 17 different countries in my class, and to generalize, the Northern European students were very focused, especially the Scandinavians, the Germans, and the Dutch, on their studies. The European system is that you have to choose a major before you actually start learning. So their system is different than our liberal arts educational system. And they were very focused. They were planning a career in marketing, and they were trying to get tools for their future careers. And then another takeaway was the students in the southern countries, in this case, France, Spain, Italy, didn't have the same language as English language skills, and they were having a harder time. And I fault their governments because, as it happens, the language of international business is English, and it's not helping them if they don't get a chance to learn English. And then we had a few American students and a few British students and others from different countries. The British, if I can generalize, were there for the party. They were drunk half the time and probably smoking stuff the other half the time. And they were not very focused. They were having a great time. The Americans in general were a little less mature than the Europeans, in my mind. And so they had challenges. And pretty much by definition, when you're immature, you don't know you're immature. So I'd ask the Americans, are you having a good time? Is this interesting for you? And they would say something like, yes, really hard classes. And the Europeans dress so well. So I take that as the Americans knew that there was a difference, but couldn't quite put the finger on the differences in the cultures. And studies have shown that Americans are a little less mature in their early 20s, late teens than Europeans who have to choose their major, move out of the house, and other pretty extreme events at a younger age than Americans do. So that I thought that was very interesting. And while I was there, the apartment next to mine was two young ladies, and I talked to them for a bit, and eventually I learned that they work in the red light district. Now, those of you that don't know, the red light district is legalized prostitution. If you've seen pictures or been there, the women stand behind a big plate glass window, usually in lingerie or a bikini, offering their wares. And it's a very different scene. In the American culture, it seems unimaginable, but prostitution is legal in many parts of the world and turned a blind eye on many other parts of the world as long as it's between consenting adults. And so I was able to take the young ladies out to lunch and get to know them. I didn't push them too hard. I didn't want to be an older American, ask them questions about their profession. But with time, as I asked the questions that we would all like to know about, how much does it cost? How do you negotiate? What weird things go on behind the closed doors. And I learned a lot. And one of my key takeaways, I put it in my book, was I had, at this point, I'd been there for several years. I talked with my friends who were young ladies in the red light district, and I had talked to women I knew who were strippers, and they both said the same thing about the other's job. So they're both in the sex industry, but they both said the others, meaning the strippers about the hookers and the hookers about the strippers. They both said they work too hard for the money. And I thought that was fascinating. And so I put that in my book. So, all was well. And then one night at about 12 or 1 in the morning, I got a telephone call. And it was these friends of mine who worked behind the glass in the red light district. And they asked me, could I bring them some chicken McNuggets? And I said, sure. and I bought a bucket of chicken McNuggets. Now I'm worried that my students or fellow teachers would see me in the red light district. So I put my collar up, my hat down, and I telephoned them, "Where is your bordello where they work from?" They call it a window. And I got there, and just then they got a couple of customers, so I didn't want to stand out in the rain. So I stood in the window, hiding behind my bucket of chicken McNuggets, hoping nobody would see me. And we had a laugh, and I gave them the chicken McNuggets. Didn't think much about it, but 2 weeks later, by pure coincidence, the governor of Utah and a lot of the bigwigs came over to Amsterdam because we had a new flight, direct flight, Amsterdam to Salt Lake City, and they wanted to promote it. So, being a Utah professor, they asked me to show them around, and it was interesting. Amsterdam has a lot of wide opening experiences, especially compared to conservative Utah. And when we got to a coffee shop is where marijuana is sold legally. And when we got to the red light district, all of the aides were like, "Okay, all cameras away, all phones away." They didn't want a picture of these bigwigs looking into the cannabis industry or into the red light windows. So interesting. I think they learned a lot. They saw a lot. So I was walking with the governor and his group through the red light district, and I didn't think much about it, but the two young ladies I talked about earlier recognized me, and they opened their doors, and my nickname to them was Professor Cowboy because I wear a cowboy hat, and they smiled at me and obviously knew me. And the governor looked at me and said, "So you're on a first name basis with the working women here?" And I tried to explain to him my chicken McNugget delivery story, but he didn't seem to believe me. Um, One of my takeaways from traveling in the red light district and seeing how their lives were, and talking to them with respect, with kindness, um, honesty and respect goes a long way. And with time, they were opening up and telling me more about their lives. It was fascinating, and I consider myself lucky to have learned about a part of human life that we always seem to be interested in, but I saw it from the inside, and I consider myself lucky.
Being able to teach in Utah and then go over and teach in Amsterdam, it's a stark contrast from Utah and the bigwigs of Utah being coming to Amsterdam. That must have been a culture shock for them, and you have to experience and just respect people's culture because at the end of the day, that's what people do with their daily lives, and that's not a place you live. So you're just trying to coexist with that and trying to learn as much as possible. And I think that speaks to your curiosity, just trying to learn and assimilate and kind of go with the flow, as you will, um, and teach there. Talk about the dynamic between teaching in Utah and the difference between teaching in Europe.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Americans in general are not always the world's best travelers. We can go a long distance, and it's much the same language, currency, culture, and so forth. And so when we do go overseas, it can be a real shock to the system. Europeans, Asians, and others, pretty much any TV or radio channel is going to be a different language. The tourists they meet are going to be from different countries, and they're just more open because they have more experience with foreign visitors. So when I started teaching in both places, I was really careful of what was happening. Whereas in Utah, which is generally pretty conservative, my students might write in the evaluations, "Please don't use so many four-letter words," which is really on the conservative side of things. Where in this case in Amsterdam, we had students who were either working in the sex or drug industry or at least familiar with it, and it was not looked down upon. That was their lifestyle choices, and I kind of respect the Dutch way of you do what you want to do, I'll do what I want to do, I won't bother you, you don't bother me. And I kind of adopted that for me too, and try to be a little less judgmental, which unfortunately Americans tend to be. So it was a good learning experience for me. It's great for the students who come back and forth, and in this case, the bigwigs. You know, they get a whole new exposure to a different part of the world. I don't know what they personally took away from it, but I'd like to believe that it was good for them also.
I believe it's good for everybody to go out and see different things, and that's what this whole podcast is about is getting people out of their comfort zone and go experience new things and learn about these people. And speaking on the maturity levels between the United States students and the European students, obviously Europe has many different cultures. United States is more or less the same throughout the states, a little minor differences, but I think it's correlated to the drinking age being at 18, also the exposure to a lot of things at an early age, and your parents not sheltering you as much in Europe as opposed to United States, where you're more or less in a bubble. In Europe, you have many different cultures surrounding you.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm not trying to make a value judgment on it. You know, we have our whole life to be adults. Maybe it's good to be younger a little bit longer. But I also worry about them from a safety standpoint. And, you know, they're not equipped to travel well. I have a theory I call the Jose Cuervo theory, which is pretty much everybody who tries tequila for the first time goes, "This isn't too bad." And then within an hour, they're throwing up their guts. What I'm pointing out is sometimes you have to learn the hard way. And regardless of what people tell you, sometimes you have to experience it for yourself. And so there are different systems educationally, certainly different cultures. And I think all of this is just really interesting to study and to participate in and point out the differences. And I try to do that with my students from all the countries.
Yeah, sometimes you do have to learn the hard way, and I implore every student out there, if they have the opportunity to do a student abroad or study abroad program, and check out these different countries for a semester or two, or however long you have the opportunity to do that, because I think it's good to get that perspective at a young age. Um, but and get used to different cultures at a young age and bring that back and use that in your everyday life. So you've taught in Scandinavia, you've taught in all over Europe, all over the world with the semester at sea program. By this time, you're coming up on age 50, you know, and as you call it, you have your midlife crisis, like so many people do. You want to take another huge trip around the world, and this time you're looking at Asia. You're looking at Southeast Asia. Talk about what led up to that, and talk about your experiences there and some of the more memorable moments of that trip.
I think that when you start to hit the Middle Ages, for lack of a better term, you start thinking about your life, what you've accomplished, what you hope to still accomplish, what your values are. And for me, I thought, well, I want to try to travel to a few places that I haven't been to learn about them while I'm still physically fit and capable of doing it. And so I kind of made a commitment to myself to take about a half a year off on my 50th year to get back into my backpack and to take off without a strong itinerary, but just kind of a direction and goal, and to see what life was like. So I did take my backpack and I took off again in this case, to Asia. And I traveled mostly through Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, Bali, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And I would travel with a backpack and then stay in a place for longer than I would like to, just to try to learn about that culture and learn from other travelers where other places were to be. And in many ways, I had gone full circle from my early days bicycling through Europe and got a chance to do it again 30 years later. And it was interesting. You know, we don't know a lot. A lot of Americans don't know a lot about Asia and the differences in the cultures and the peoples. And I did learn a lot. It was fascinating. At one point, for instance, I was traveling through the jungles of Thailand in the very north in what's called the Golden Triangle, which is unfortunately a very dangerous area because there's a lot of poppies grown there and gangs converting them into heroin. But I traveled around and I got to the very north and I got a guide and we snuck into Laos, which was and is still very communist and somewhat hostile to Americans. And we had instead of going to the regular crossing points over bridges, we waded across the river. And for just a day or two, I smuggled my way into Laos and got a chance to see it. And it wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done. My family and friends didn't know where I was, and it was a dangerous area. There's no question about it. I had a lot of eyes on me, both from authorities, but also from smugglers and people up to no good. And but I got a chance to see it, and same with Myanmar, and to see the refugees from Myanmar that were now in Thailand, and see a really tough part of the world. And I consider myself very lucky, but you don't want to tempt fate. And I was on the dangerous side of things in those regions where I was off the beaten path from the touristy places, and I'm not sure it was the wisest thing I ever did.
Yeah, your adventures when you were young is you're used to going off the beaten path, but I guess as you get older and you don't have those, facilities and the hospitals or anything like that, anything could happen to you at that. I mean, at that age, any age, but especially you need to be cautious when you are a little older, right?
Very good points. And that was one of my learning experiences is, what happens if something were to happen to me? And I really haven't done that kind of a risky adventure since then, just because, you have to have a balance between risk and reward. And I ideally want to learn about places and see things and people, but I also have to keep an eye open as I get older about, safety and health and eating correctly and sleeping correctly. So I'm now trying to keep that balance going.
In that whole trip, did you have a moment in time that stuck out in particular, more than others?
There are many, but this is going to sound small and petty, but it really did stick out to me. I was traveling through Cambodia, and Cambodia at that point had just recently opened up to tourism. It was formerly strong communist country, and then it became under Pol Pot just a terrible dictatorship where they murdered many of their own people. Awful, awful, awful. But I was heading towards some of the more famous touristy spots, but out in the middle of nowhere. And I was with some group of English speaking Cambodians who helped me a little bit, and I helped them a little bit. But we came to a little roadside market, and it seemed to me they were all selling the same leafy vegetable. To me, it looked a lot like a weed. I didn't recognize it, but I noticed behind the crowd trying to sell me this vegetable, each purveyor trying to sell their vegetables, was about a 10 or 11-year-old little girl, and she was trying to sell the vegetables, but the adults were pushing her out of the way, and she wasn't able to sell her vegetables. So I pushed my way past all these kind of aggressive vendors and went to her and bought from her some of her vegetables for about 50 cents. It was a big mound of vegetables. And I gave her what would be the equivalent of $5. And then she started crying and told the translator that she couldn't make change and she was afraid she was going to lose the sale. So I said to the translator, let her keep the $5, it's no problem, and to wish her well. And I felt like I did my good deed for the day, but I later learned that through the translator, you probably just fed her family for the next couple of weeks. And this is a huge thing for them. And so it just was kind of rewarding for me. She was a darling little girl with a big smile. And I just remember her smiling, having made that money, and how important it was to her. And this is a small story, but it strikes home in my heart.
Wow, that paints a picture of really how people have it around the world, and usually, I think you've noticed this as well. When people are in those situations in these developing countries, the only way is up, and usually they are happy. I think I've noticed that around the world, the people with the least are the most happiest.
I agree wholeheartedly. Um, we often in the Western cultures compare ourselves to the rich and what we don't have compared to them. Think about it in our advertisements, our sports heroes, our movie and television heroes. They're really emphasizing on their wealth as a emblem of success. It's entirely different in most of Asia. They have a different value system and what's important to them, to their family, to their health, to their happiness. And I just find it fascinating to learn that they don't value these kind of materialistic things, and that they have other values that we can learn a lot from.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, they value more family and community oriented as opposed to individualism in the West. So they want to take care of their family and feed everyone around them, and that's just more important than being individually successful.
Yeah, I mean, little kids go around happy. They don't seem to cry as much as or want as much as our little kids do. If I was to put it into one word, and I'm really generalizing through a lot of different cultures, but I would say they value how to live life in harmony. And that's just so different from us, but so impressive to me. I really did learn a lot from some of those cultures.
Yeah, for sure. I feel the same way when I've been to some of these countries, and I feel like uh, taking some of that with you and finding a balance in your life, I think leads you to being more happy um, than I was previously, and using some of these examples um, is everyday in everyday situations is really cool and something that travel gives you.
Yeah. And, for me, being dyslexic meant that I couldn't read about these places very easily. So to experience them, it's called experiential learning. Even in now in my 50s, what just struck home, just really interesting. When you don't speak a language, you have to look at people in their eyes a little more carefully. You have to be more aware of feelings and events around you. And I just found that unbelievably rewarding.
Yeah, and travel definitely gives you that and gives you that experience, and I hope everyone out there takes something and actually tries to go to Asia or tries to go to some of these countries that are developing. And a lot of people do think that that is a bad thing, but I honestly do not. And I honestly think you're helping them and you're helping the local economy by traveling there and giving them tourism and giving them tourist money, especially in these developing countries. But you come back stateside from that trip, and you've been teaching all over the world. You've taught in Bulgaria, Sweden, everywhere. So you have not only the traveler experience, you have the experience of teaching in these countries and imparting knowledge to the youth as far as international business, marketing. Uh, Talk about Bulgaria and Sweden and some of your experiences there.
Yeah, so I've taught now in two different universities in Sweden, one in Denmark, one in Bulgaria. As I mentioned, Amsterdam for many years, and U.S. Primarily in Utah for many years, and on the Semester Sea cruise ship. So I try to also be a learner, even though I'm a teacher, and to see how people learn differently. And one of my takeaways as I became a better professor, if I can say it like that, is that people do learn differently. And having been having gone through dyslexia and realizing there's no real cure for it, I'm going to have to struggle the rest of my days with it. I was a better teacher because I could empathize with students who learn differently. And so, what I would try to do in some cases is to tell stories, much like we've talked about in this program, with a meaning. So they get a chance to see business, but in a real life application. So I would say, this is how the book is written. This is the concept they want to get across, but I want to share with you a real life story of how something happened to me that explains that. And they seem to really enjoy, especially for international marketing, the real life experiences along with the academic material. And I got some very rewarding, nice comments about the class and my ability to teach. Um, and just really interesting how different people learn differently. And, all of my family and friends know my background as a terrible, terrible student. And they laugh that I'm now a professor and being invited back to different programs. Um, but again, one of the things I would do with them, besides giving them real life examples, is I would share my failures, my academic and business and professional failures. And not many teachers will do that, but I want them to know that life isn't over. If you fail at something, the key thing is to learn from it and put it in what we call our toolkit and take it with us for the next whatever is out there for you. I'm now a better manager because I work for crappy managers. I'm a better teacher because I had to study under poor teachers here and there. A better traveler from things I've picked up along the way. Um, and I think it's important for students to realize that failure is not the end of the world.
No, it's not at all. And I've had my fair share of failures, and you do fail more than you succeed in life. And if you just get a couple of those successes, and it's from most of those learning experiences from those failures that you do succeed, and you do become a great teacher, professor like you are, or a great traveler, or a great business person. So it leads into everything in life, and uh, go out there and just take a chance. That's the main point. Just take a risk and travel while you're young. And and take business risks, and follow your passions, and just leave it all out there. And that's a main point.
Yeah, I would call it a wise risk. What I mean is, I have friends, former friends, who were just too crazy. They would run drugs, let's say, from Africa up to Europe, or taking really dangerous, silly risks. And a lot of them are not with us anymore. So you have to have that little light in the back of your head going on. This might be a little bit further than I have a comfort level doing. But, you know, I use this in my class. The average American has 4 careers and 16 different jobs, and they move up to 24 times in their lifetime. And there's a couple of books out there that talk about this, but a lot of Americans are not happy with their lot in life. They want more, but they can't identify what the more is. So for me, it was getting out there, take the risk to go travel, know what's happening around me, do a little research before I go, and that made all the difference in the world to me. Other people would find something else, but we were never meant to do the same thing for 70 years in a row and then die. We do need to challenge ourselves. We need to find purpose in our lives. And for me, it was through travel.
And you gained a lot of this curiosity and risk taking from your family, which we talked a lot about in part one,
Mhm.
about your parents, your siblings, and mainly your dad, which is a big influence. And he was an influential man, successful man. And you got to travel with them a bit before they ended up terminally ill. Your dad was terminally ill. Your mom, it was more of a all of a sudden kind of thing.
Mhm.
Talk about getting to share moments with them and travel with them before their deaths.
Yeah, I've shared with you what travel meant to me and still means to me, but I never thought it would also be a way of saying goodbye to my parents. So, my father, a very hearty, intellectual, hardworking man, got a terminal heart disease. He knew that his time was limited, and each time I got together with him, he was getting weaker. So we did do a couple trips, so one to Europe and one through the American West, and just taking the time, sitting on the bus or on the plane or in the car together, gave us time to talk and talk about our values. For me, and I think for him, It was really important to spend that quality time together, sharing some of our stories and our philosophies. It was a hard time to see him slowly sinking. Eventually, I had to push him in a wheelchair, and this once powerful man becoming weaker and weaker was very hard for me. And he actually faced his demise with a great deal of bravery and courage, and I have so much respect for him. He knew what was going on. He shared his thoughts on death, and I consider myself very lucky to have spent that very quality time with him. My mother, on the other hand, was a surprise when she passed away. And by pure coincidence, the year before, I took her to her home where she grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to see the graves of her parents. And again, by spending time together in the hotel room and driving to the grave sites, and so we never said it, but we knew it was the last time she would see them. And it was important for me to hear and see how she grew up, and which was a total surprise to me, and to learn about her life. And again, I consider myself lucky to have spent that kind of quality time towards the latter years of her life. And this chapter, it's basically final goodbyes through travel. It's more philosophical in nature. It's about the meaning of life and what to do with our remaining time. You start thinking of your own demise when you're faced this with your parents. It's a lot of emotions, and I kind of realized that through these travel experiences, I was learning to think about and prepare for my final journey, and prepare myself for that. And it's hopefully not going to be for a little while, but living through my parents' experiences was very instructive and important for me.
Yeah, it's wonderful you got to experience some travel with them before their deaths, yet eye-opening for you. Uh, and I imagine you started creating that bucket list and started putting little like a punch list, if you will, to travel to these different countries that you always wanted to travel to, even though there's not many left for you. That's leading into one of the final chapter here, the bucket list year. Um, Talk about what led up to that. It was in COVID when you started, or a little before COVID when you started planning. COVID hit, and it gave you the time to start writing this book to begin with. Uh, where we're at right now in the library.
Yeah, so by pure coincidence, my father and mother passed away, my best friend passed away, and my girlfriend passed away, all within about 5 or 6 years. And these were hard hitting experiences for me. It made me think about the fragility and impermanence of life. And I started thinking that I would like to go and travel a bit more, and what would I like to go see and do. And just when I was preparing to leave, COVID hit, and that put an end to pretty much all international air travel and, uh, and going anywhere. So I spent much of the COVID period thinking about where I wanted to go, creating my own bucket list of destinations, but I also got a chance to start writing this book. Now, there's something incongruent about a dyslexic writing a book, and I would spend time thinking about how I'm going to organize it, how I'm going to recall some of my experiences. The first thing I did was get my journals from my travels as a young man, and I looked at them, and it was the same story on every page. Went to this bar, met this girl. So it was not exactly the most insightful way to get started. But by thinking about it and turning it over in my head, spending quiet moments, I started getting the formulation of the stories that I've been sharing for all these years, and the order they were in, and getting my thoughts together. And when what I would do is I'd come into the library and seal myself in a quiet white room with no distractions and just write. I call it diarrhea of the pen. Just get it out, get it on page. Maybe not in order, maybe I come back to it, but just start putting it down to help me get my thoughts together. And every evening I would think about, oh, I should add this and subtract that. Oh, this came first, or whatever it was. And it's a process. The writing process is fascinating, very difficult. I wrote it and rewrote it and proofread it at least 40 times, and there's still errors in there. But I'm also kind of proud of how The Happy Wanderer came out. And so as COVID was ending, I got a chance to travel, and I decided to fulfill my bucket list wishes. And for me, the first one was Peru, someplace that a lot of people have been to, but I had never seen that part of the world. And I saw a little bit of Ecuador too. And I did the hikes and the treks and learned a lot about the cultures and just really fascinating. And Machu Picchu is amazing, but so are other parts of their culture. Very hardworking people, and very photographic country with huge differences between the sea on the west coast in Lima all the way up to the Andes Mountains, just beautiful. And I kept going. I then went to Guatemala and Belize and Mexico, again, a part of the world I hadn't been to. Learned a lot about those indigenous peoples and their lives and what today's life is like and the challenges they have, the absolute poverty in some of these countries, the beauty, the Aztec and Inca sites, just fascinating, fascinating. And then I kind of went the other way and did something really out of the norm, something that most people don't get a chance to do, which was I took an expedition ship to the North Pole. So a lot of people nowadays have been to the Antarctic, but very few of us have been to the Arctic. So in my case, you grab the ship in Iceland. It's a destination to itself that is just fascinating, especially for natural wonders. And we went north for many days. We went to a couple of places that are uninhabited islands, some of the most isolated places in the world, and the only thing on the beaches are washed up old wooden ships and whale bones. And then you keep going until you hit a certain degree where the ships can't go anymore. The Antarctic is a landmass, the Arctic is just an ice shelf. And we went up to that, and it came out to be some of the most beautiful pictures I've ever taken, some of the most beautiful landscapes. And one of the things that struck me about that area was how absolutely quiet it was and pollution free. There is no other, we saw no other humans. On an expedition cruise ship, there's no casinos, there's no bands. It's not like a typical cruise ship. You wake up at 6 in the morning, you get in rafts, and you go to an iceberg or to an ice shelf, and you learn about the animals that are there. We saw a couple polar bear, and I didn't know this, but polar bear are the only mammal that will actively hunt humans. So you have to give them their space. And just one of my most rewarding trips in terms of beauty and getting out of my comfort zone. I spent about 3 weeks in the Arctic. It was tough. The weather was hard. It wasn't a lot of luxuries, but absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it must have been an intense experience. It was about a year of travel, I think, a little bit over a year. And when you got up into that Arctic with the Svalbard archipelago and closer to the North Pole, you were in 24-hour daylight for most of it, right?
Yeah, if you, it's interesting. Some people, including me, wanted to see the Aurora Borealis, which is the green lights in the North Pole, and we couldn't see them because in the summer it's 24-hour daylight. You need to have dark skies to see the phenomenon. But it's such a strange feeling to go to bed with with the sun so strong you could get a tan, and wake up with the same circumstances. It does throw your internal body clock out of whack. The alternative is I've also been in Scandinavia during the winters when there's only 2.5 hours of glow, not even sunlight a day. Interesting how people live through it, how they get used to it. And I'm talking about locals who live there. One of my takeaways is how nice the local peoples that live in these very isolated places are. They're happy to see other humans and interact with other humans. They know everybody in their little community. Just a real coordination or harmony with nature. For instance, in Svalbard, they all have to walk around with rifles over their shoulder because of the polar bear threat. And but they just take their life. They really enjoy it and take these really odd natural phenomenon in stride and work within those confines. And I was very respectful of how they've managed to live their lives.
Yeah, it takes a different type of person to live up there and be so remote. And you really have to love nature. I mean, you don't have anything else. You don't have much vegetation. You don't have much wildlife, not much flora, fauna at all. In your travel, so over that whole year, you did it a little bit differently than you have in the past. So, but in the past, you've been a pretty independent traveler, and not guide. I've been on guided tours. On this one in Peru, Yucatan Peninsula, the cruise ship, you're more or less on guided tours the whole time. I want you to talk about the pros and cons of the guided tours as opposed to independent travel.
It's a great question. All my life, especially through my youth, I did what I wanted to do, went where I wanted to go, was on my own, very comfortable with it, and there's a certain freedom in that kind of travel. But as I get older, even little things like language barriers, cultural barriers, safety play a bigger part in your thinking about travel. So I had to, I even say I had to, but I didn't want to, but I joined a couple basically backpacker type of tour companies. I was by far the oldest person on the tours. It did bring me back to some of my memories of backpacking on my own, but it is easier. The van is waiting for you. The hotel is already prearranged. You get somebody to explain to you what you're seeing. So in terms of ease, there's no question about it. But again, you give a little bit of your independence. So I was willing to take that trade off. But if I'm being honest, it was hard. And you have personality disputes. You have different interests in different places, different interests in what to eat and how to be. And for me to be in a group was another, as I look at it, another learning experience. Not always pleasant, but at other times very interesting and rewarding. And I learned a lot from my fellow travelers.
Yeah, and as you get older, I guess sometimes that's the natural progression of things. You want the comfort as opposed to the more rugged, independent, solo traveling. And you're with a group, you're with people that are explaining things, you're with experts. So there's definitely something to be said about that. And what I want to do is gather those links to those companies, and I will put those in the description along with your website and stuff, and give people these resources if they do want to go on these tours, that they do have those options.
Yeah, I've been gathering these things over the years, and I put them basically in the back of my book. I also put in 100 travel tips that I thought was interesting for people to take a look at. And if anybody wants to contact me through the website, it's called hwanderer.com. They're welcome to do that. You live life one time, and I personally want to have as many experiences and adventures as I can. And for me, travel was the ticket.
And same for me, man. The experiential learning has been everything for me, and I've been able to learn through experience like yourself, and been able to gather so much knowledge and different things off of these travels and adventures that I've been on, you've been on, um, and talk about some of the tips that mean the most to you, and I think that stand out the most. Just give me a few of those tips from the appendix that you think are the most important.
Well, you're putting me on the spot a little bit, but I can share a couple. One is I have a little section about travel safety for women, and I do worry about some of the challenges that women face. Um, and it does exist out there, and we have to be aware of it. And I talk about it in my classes that young men are aware of some of the challenges women face. We don't always think of that. Also, how to pack light. You're going to be carrying everything. how to be wise in the type of bags. For instance, I like what's called collapsible duffel bags that are on wheels so that you can put them over your shoulder if you're in a place with, let's just say, cobblestone streets where the wheels won't work well. But you can also, if you're in a place for a while, you can unpack and the collapsible duffel bag can go under your bed. And these are the types of little tricks that I learned along the way, and how to be with other people, how to take pictures discreetly, just being a wise traveler, experienced traveler. And as I mentioned earlier today, just knowing what's going on around you without being paranoid, just be aware. These are skills that you'll take with you. They're universal for the rest of your days.
Yeah, those are great tips, man, and I hope everyone enjoys the tips and the stories that you've had, um, and enjoyed listening to this podcast and the part one, part two of your book, The Happy Wonder, Global Dyslexics Global Adventure. So thank you for coming on, and it's been an extreme pleasure having you on for these two episodes and getting to learn more about you and your book. And I think it's fascinating. I think everyone should visit hwonder.com and be able to and purchase your book and um, uh, get something out of it and enjoy the pictures more than anything. I think I enjoy the pictures almost as much as the stories.
Thank you very much. Through travel, you learn about the people and places and cultures, but what people maybe don't think about is they learn a lot about themselves. And I'm just such a strong advocate of getting out there and experiencing, taking a little risk, getting out of your comfort zone. You'll come back a better, fuller person. And please take a trip.
Yep, sound advice. With that, we're going to wrap this up, and I hope you enjoyed listening to part two with me and Michael Kaplan, also known as the Professor, and about all about his book, The Happy Wonder: A Dyslexic Global Adventure. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful.
It's been a pleasure. Folks, always remember, the world is your oyster.
That's a wrap on this episode of People, Places, and Things. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Whether you're dreaming of your next adventure or just love hearing stories from across the globe, we hope we inspired a bit of wanderlust in you today. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with fellow travelers. Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, keep discovering new people, places, and things.